Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Wright. I'm the Chief Editor of Life Science Leader. Today, we're going to talk about the 39th Annual JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, or what most people just simply refer to as JPM. Now, the 39th Annual JP Morgan Healthcare Conference has announced that it's going to be virtual this year. And that is a really significant deal because people that have gone to JP Morgan understand that this event is like the annual kickoff and Super Bowl for our industry kind of combined. And here's why. So JP Morgan's been having this conference for a really long time. And during like the second week of January, it's going to be from Monday, like 8 to 5 to mid-Thursday. There's going to be about 400 companies that do back-to-back presentations all in the Westin St. which is, right down on Union Square. So you're bringing all these life science thought leaders together in this one place. Well, and you're doing it for a long time. So what's happened is all these peripheral conferences have popped up. Biotech Showcase is just down the street. There's Resi that's right around the corner. And there's even some health technology events that have taken place. So none of that's happening this year. So what we wanted to talk about is kind of, some of people's past experiences of attending JPM, along with how they're preparing for this year's JPM, and maybe what we see going forward in the future. And we're hoping we can get some best business practices out of the conversation today. So let's meet today's executive virtual roundtable participants. And I'm going to have them just do a brief self-introduction so we can get into asking some questions and having a conversation. So please, starting with you, Terry Ann.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Terry Ann Burrell, CFO of Beam Therapeutics.
Hi, I'm Hunter Smith, CFO of Rhythm Pharmaceuticals.
And I'm Dr. James Woody, the CEO of 180 Life Sciences.
Great. Thanks for those concise introductions. So we have a CFO and a CEO and two CFOs. And so I wanted to ask a question to Terry Ann because I was trying to paint the picture of JPM in the introduction. And I don't know if I did a very good job of it, but Terry Ann, before she was a CFO, actually worked for JP Morgan and attended this thing for like 13 years on that side of the table. So I was wondering if you could kind of paint the picture for us from your experience.
Absolutely. Great question. I think you did a great job painting the picture, certainly from a different perspective, but I will say from a former banker's perspective at JP Morgan, I'd say the conference was pretty anticlimactic for many of us. I mean, we spent weeks, trying to figure out which private companies got invited or which uncovered public companies would get invited. And there's so few slots that it was obviously always a controversial experience. And so you're doing this all through the holidays rather than enjoying the holiday period with your families. You are continuing to prepare materials, schedule meetings, and you get to the conference and you're not only exhausted, but you realize you're stuck on the 6th floor of the Westin St. From, as you described, Monday to Thursday. You have no idea what is going on in the outside world. And, to paint this picture even a little bit more, you're not even in meeting rooms. The 6th floor was converted bedrooms, right, hotel rooms. So imagine no bathrooms, right? So you're trying to sneak in between meetings, locking the doors, keeping meeting participants out just to get a bathroom break in. The food gets worse and worse. Everybody gets sicker and sicker as the week goes on. And you're just feeling pretty fatigued. No real appreciation for the excitement that has really built for people coming into the conference and what's going on in the outside world. And so it was obviously, looking back now, especially in the context where it's gone virtual, you miss some of those things, but it certainly was a little bit more subdued for us.
Thanks for that, Terry. And so before I let you go, though, so compare that experience to what it was like, because wasn't last year your first experience as presenting as a CFO?
Yes, it was. And what a different experience it was. I mean, imagine you're walking outside every day, you're getting sunlight, fresh air. And I think it was the first year that I really fully appreciated just the depth and breadth of the universe that was happening outside of the Westin St. Francis. I mean, every single hotel that you went into, the lobbies were full. You saw the signs for meeting rooms. Every single bank is having sort of a satellite set of meetings out there because they can meet with all the strategics, all the large cap pharma, large cap biotech companies, and emerging biotech companies are out there. You referenced Bio Showcase, but a lot of affinity organizations that really descend on San Francisco during that meeting. And I really had you hear about it, but really had no appreciation that every corner that you went to was actually booked. And thankfully, we were smart enough to build in extra time between meetings because I realized why, after the fact, you ran into someone that you knew every single block. And so it would take you an extra 10 or 15 minutes to get where you wanted to go because someone you haven't seen in 3 or 4 or 5 years, or maybe even just 2 months. So it is an overwhelming experience, but I think, one that I certainly enjoyed a lot being on the other side.
I really appreciate the enthusiasm you share because I've tried to describe it to people in saying, like, have you ever been to Las Vegas? Because if they have, then I say, then, it's like it from that standpoint. You can't really imagine it until you really see it, like you just described. So I wanted to transition over to Hunter and ask you a little bit about how you went about preparing for an in-person JPM, because you, I think, got to go as a VP level type employee as well back in the days when you were with Celgene, right?
Sure. And so, by the way, I have to start by saying I'm a little dizzy because before this started, I looked at Terry Ann's stock chart again, and it always kind of, those stratospheric volatility is unsettling. I don't know how she keeps up with it herself, but anyway, congrats to Terry Ann. But yeah, what I would say is I had a very marginal role in JP Morgan before coming to Rhythm, and it was kind of cool just to be part of Celgene, because Celgene sort of nameplated JP Morgan in its own way. We always led off the conference, and there were numerous famous transactions Celgene was involved with that came out of the conference. And, I really played a negligible part in those activities. I think one of the most famous ones was around 2013 or 14 when Jackie Faust actually went up again in the leadoff slot and put out 5-year revenue guidance for the first time. Which is, I think, the first time any company had given anything so bold as that. And it really was transformative to the investor perception of Celgene, which had just had some PV scares that turned out to be unjustified, but really had made people nervous about Revlimid, which of course has proven to be a transformative therapy for multiple myeloma patients. So, the internal machinations of a large, very high growth, high revenue producing and very profitable large cap biotech like Celgene really revolved. There was very much a planning cycle that was driven by JP Morgan itself. What are we going to put on the table when we get to JPM, both in terms of milestones we want to talk about, pipeline development we want to talk about, but also financial projections, both for the current year and the coming year. And so while I didn't have to endure that to the same extent as, for example, Patrick Flanagan, who was the head of IR at the time, Patrick really captained that effort in a magnificent way for a very, very large team inside the company. The whole company sort of felt the need to deliver for JP Morgan. It was really it was very much part of our planning cycle. The company revolved around it.
So compare that to how you look at it now as a CFO at Rhythm.
So it's quite a bit. I think Terry Ann described it very well. And what I would say is that it's kind of, even fun being, a CFO at a small cap biotech company and being ex-Celgene is even more fun because it's like a high school reunion, because there are so many Celgene people that are now dispersed around biotechnology that we're seeing each other everywhere, whether it's at a BD meeting or whether you're staying in the same hotel, you show up at the same reception. It's a great deal of fun. But I would say it is very much about the ecosystem around the St. Francis and that part of San Francisco, and walking in and out of, a hotel lobby to try and get a table, or a department store to sit somewhere and talk in the furniture department or something like that. And I remember one particular memory. We were at a really badly repurposed Holiday Inn over towards the financial district. And we get in an Uber to go over to our meeting rooms. And the Uber driver says, I'm a local, but there are 10,000 Uber drivers who are not from the metro of San Francisco, who literally just come here this week. So your expectations change, and your perspective changes very much, and it's changed this year.
Yeah. So James, you were going to say something, because I was getting ready to loop you into the conversation.
Well, I guess one of the things, and I've been attending since about 2006. I was a general partner at Lateral Venture Partners. And so we would have 3 or 4 companies there that were trying to raise money, and 3 or 4 of them that had gone IPO and were presenting. But the thing that's changed most is that previously everything was kind of in walking distance of the Westin. You could go down to the Hilton or up and down the street. But with Uber and Lyft, all of a sudden, everybody spread all over the city. And in 2 or 3 minutes, you could be to the other end of the city for these investment bankers who have taken over a whole hotel or things like that. So that part's really changed. And so you pick your 20 or 30 companies you want to listen to and go to. And then the rest of the time, you're spread all over the city. It was interesting.
So that's something I really didn't think of, is how Uber, I knew it came in pretty handy when the weather turned crappy, and that happened a couple of times where you were buying umbrellas by the 6-pack, but I hadn't really thought of like how Uber has facilitated it to be able to morph out and grow bigger.
Well, as Hunter pointed out, there's thousands of extra drivers. And so you walk outside and with your cell phone, and 2 minutes later, somebody picks you up and takes you to the other end of the city, and then you come back. It was a big change, actually.
So you mentioned going back, having gone there since like 2006, I think. So when was the first time you ever presented during JPM? Jim?
Well, in our situation, we brought our companies that were trying to raise money, and the CEOs of the public companies would present. So I didn't do any presenting. I have 2 now that I could present, but they're just off the ground. But I attended lots and lots of the presentations of our CEOs of the ones who went public or merged at an M&A.
Was there ever a significant deal that you recollect? Because I know I wanted, as Terry Ann had talked about, the action being outside the walls of the Westin St. Francis. Was there any time that you recollected an encounter or something like that taking place that really stuck with you, that became a deal of significance? I'm asking that to Jim first, but I'll open it up to everyone.
Yeah, sure. Last year at JP Morgan, one of my companies that I founded down in San Diego called Viracta, we met with probably 3 or 4 investment bankers and had good meetings with them and their analysts. And now, just about a month ago, we were able to put together a $60 million or $40 million crossover round. We did a reverse merger into a public company, and the investment bankers we met with raised us another $60 million. So all of that came out of our meetings at JP Morgan. It was fantastic.
Pretty productive. Anybody else have anything they'd like to chime in with?
I'm happy to start. Thanks, Hunter. I would say that on the bank, when I was on the banking side, the conference, yes, officially starts on Monday, but one of the things that JP Morgan started doing several years ago was a private company reception on Sunday night, right? Identifying really high quality private companies that we thought had a lot of promise and inviting 25 or 30 investors who are really the bellwethers in healthcare and bringing them all together on Sunday night, very informal opportunity to chat and engage. And I would always be surprised at the quality of the interaction and just how much came out of those conversations in terms of leading into, formalizing a crossover round and then ultimately into the IPO, making that connection and just really building those initial relationships and deepening them in a very informal context, I think is very powerful. And I think that happens a lot at the conference. It's not always in these formal settings that you find things that are happening or building relationships.
The only one I'll refer to, and Terry Ann, you may have been a part of this, I don't know, but there was sort of, I think the biggest in-licensing deal ever announced was Celgene in-licensing a compound called GED0301 from an Italian privately owned development company with a $710 million upfront, over $2 billion milestones, and tiered double-digit royalties. And this was a process that was, from what I understood about the process, was as competitive an in-licensing process involving virtually every major pharmaceutical company that touches inflammatory disease. It was a Crohn's disease compound. And it was done at JP Morgan, right? The process was started, and maybe I can ask Terry Ann if she was involved on the advisory side for any of the parties, but maybe not.
Yeah, I recall that over lunch once, we licensed in a compound that was the primary compound for our company, Viracta. So it's a 2-hour meeting at JP Morgan, and this is what fostered the raise that we just talked about. It was a great lunch.
Yeah. No, I didn't work on that one, Hunter, but there is a lot. And that says something, too, because I think the JP Morgan conference often serves as a catalyst, right? If you're working on something November, even October, November, usually the line of sight is, okay, we really want to announce this at JP Morgan, right? And whether, that's a Pfizer deal or even several Celgene deals that we worked on over time, that was always the target. Sometimes you hit it, most times you hit it, but, every now and then it sort of would drift a week or two, but that would be the bogey that people really set for finalizing a transaction.
I also thought it was interesting that last year's conference, one of the conclusions of last year's conference was that Atlas Ventures announced that they would not be coming back. And they felt it had become too crowded and too big. And, I just read that secondhand, obviously, but, there was some reaction to the fact of the 10,000 Uber drivers and the feeding frenzy and the crowds. And so.
Yeah.
And the pricing and all that. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think the other part of it, too, is we've heard from some investors where there's just too much going on. Right? So we can't afford to be in these presentation rooms all day anymore or in a one-on-ones all day anymore. We have to be at the trading desk, right? Because we've got to be able to move as fast as the news is moving out of JP Morgan.
Great point. So we talked a little bit about the past, and so let's talk a little bit about how you're preparing for the present. So I wanted to start with you, Terry Ann, and so tell me a little bit about how you go about preparing for a virtual JPM as the CFO of a $4 billion biopharmaceutical company. At least the last time I checked it was. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's the same. It's the same as if we were a $1 billion company for sure. And I will say that a lot is still the same, right? We'll go and do the traditional corporate presentation. We have an assigned slot. the flavor of that is different this year. So I think the virtual platform has allowed them to really extend the amount of time allotted to companies. So instead of a 20-minute, 25-minute presentation, you're doing a 40-minute presentation. We also, interestingly, I think I've been surprised that investors are as engaged and as focused on that week. Right? So we have a one-on-one schedule that would match any one-on-one schedule that we would anticipate having during an in-person meeting, which I was not expecting, because I thought, in a world where you can schedule a meeting at any time, I thought investors would want to wait, either do it the week before, the week after. People want to do the meetings during that week. And so we've got a full schedule. Again, that is slightly different, where the meetings are 40 minutes instead of your typical speed dating 20, 25 minutes, which I think, will allow for some more robust conversation. And similarly, I would say we obviously always take the opportunity to spend time with our BD colleagues across the globe. In large part, it's just a check-in. It's a good opportunity to make sure that we are all saying hello to each other. And that has also been just as robust this year as in past years. I think people like starting off the year. It's a good reset, and they don't want to change that. And so we feel pretty good that not a lot has changed. I think the only thing is just being flexible, recognizing that things might be a little longer than they would typically be, and being readily available as things emerge.
So you mentioned having like a Zoom meeting schedule that would rival any in-person schedule. So I would throw this. Are you concerned about Zoom fatigue?
Well, thankfully, they've built in scheduled breaks, which is almost a benefit, because when you were in person, it literally would be back to back to back, right? You'd have one investor standing outside the door waiting for you to finish. The beauty of the virtual schedule is you can schedule it all day. So I think we start at 7:30 and it'll go to 7. But they have been able to build in 10 or 15-minute buffers between every meeting. So giving people an opportunity to get up, walk around. They also were able to allow folks to schedule meetings through any time during the 4 days, right? So you didn't have to do them all in one day. You could spread them over for the entire 4-day period, which is very different. Typically, when you present, your investor meetings are scheduled only on the day of your presentation. And so it forces you to cram everything in. In a virtual setting, they were able to open that up a lot more and give you a lot more flexibility about when you did those meetings. So that helps manage the Zoom fatigue. But at this point, I think we're all pretty accustomed to doing back-to-back Zoom meetings. And I think for many of us, we'll almost look forward to the reset of 2021.
Yeah. So when I went to JPM, my day might start by, say, I hosted a roundtable breakfast with some executives. Then I might shoot over to either the biotech showcase or over to JP Morgan to catch a couple of presentations, might have an informal lunch here, catch some more presentations. There might be an educational event. And I'm not getting back to the hotel until like 9 o'clock after attending a couple of networking sessions. And then it's back to doing it all over again the next day. So it is literally like 8 to almost midnight. It is so exhausting. So I'm asking Hunter, like, how do you capture that aspect of JPM this year? Are you doing anything to try?
So our company situation is a little different in that we have just had a drug approved, but on top of that, we have multiple data releases coming in the near term. So we've taken a much more, step back approach to virtual JP Morgan, but that's really dictated by some company specific matters. I don't think you replicate what you've described, and I think like regular sort of securities conference opportunities, can be just as vibrant and just as vigorous in this environment in every sense except the reception that occurs or the sidebar conversations in the halls. The one-on-ones are as robust, if not more robust, in the securities conference environments. I think you just have to, I have no desire to attend a virtual reception of any kind in the evenings and will gladly refuse any that I've been invited to. No offense to the sponsors, whether it's a bank or a publication or a law firm or a VC or whomever. It's more about, there's so much value from the direct interactions, but the indirect interactions and the group interactions are not as easily facilitated by this type of communications mechanism.
I agree. I mean, that's the one thing, like I was telling probably some of you when we had, an informal conversation prior, that had JP Morgan been taking place, I would have, and we wouldn't have been having the spikes that we're seeing, because I was just talking to James. He said, oh, hey, they just went under lockdown again where he's living. So, but had the plan been that JP Morgan would have been in person, I would have felt like it's probably safe for me to go. I know how to wear my mask and wash my hands and do all those things, but that's not the case. So I guess I wanted to ask, what are the pros and cons, Jim, of preparing for this virtual versus a non-virtual event?
Well, some of the pros for me are that I won't miss at all the traveling around to different places to meet with people in this kind of a relay that you get into where you've got 15 minutes between the Westin and the other part of the city. I won't miss that at all because I can set that all up on Zoom and talk to my investment bankers and other things. But as you pointed out, you'd start at 7 in the morning and you'd get back at your hotel about 10:30 or 11. And then you had to do the 100 emails that had come in during the day. And you said, why am I doing this? And you do that for 5 days in a row and you're exhausted. So I won't miss that either. The part I would miss, as you both pointed out, is the receptions and the interacting with your colleagues that you haven't seen for a long time. And you actually learn a lot. You get to tell them what you're doing. They say, oh, did you know about this or this company and what technology they have? And you link up and it's just fantastic. And that's the part I'll miss most because it's not possible to do that over Zoom. Everything's pretty focused. So on the other hand, it's going to be pretty efficient, I think. And like I said, I got my invitation today, and now I'm trying to figure out how you connect up with these different company presentations. We'll see how it works.
Does anybody have any insight on that? Because I normally get my invitation late as well. I wasn't sure if anybody got theirs first and maybe already got to investigate. Anything?
Well, as a presenting company, so JP Morgan, for every company that the analysts cover, they're automatically invited, right? So, we did get invitations pretty early in the process. I think pretty soon after they made the decision to go virtual. But I think, the benefit of being virtual for them is there are less space constraints, right? So you can actually open up the conference to a lot more people. There used to be a big diligence process, right? Because you've got to think about, we can only invite X number of people because we've got to be very concerned about how many people can actually be in the Westin St. Francis at any one time, which was probably too many anyway. I always felt like it was a fire hazard. So I think it's probably a little bit easier in the virtual world, although I'm sure they're taking steps to make sure they try to control the numbers as well.
But the presentations are going to be live and not recorded, right? You're going to be.
That's correct.
Okay. So is there a bandwidth concern? Like, is it all happening on their platform? Do we know?
That's a really good question. We did, our CEO actually was doing his dry run today. So they actually sent emails out to everyone. It's not, I don't believe it is their platform, or it is a platform that they've, certified to make sure that it can handle that kind of demand. For what it's worth, I've done many conferences this year where the presentations have been live. whether it's the Jeffries conference or the like, and it's all worked pretty well.
Okay, I was curious about that. As far as scheduling the meetings go, you talked about, again, you had this big schedule planned. Are you all using like Zoom as your platform, or Microsoft Teams, or how are you doing those? And that's for everybody, just whoever wants to take it first.
It's probably more relevant for Terry Ann because, like as I mentioned, we're not presenting directly. So.
Right.
Yeah, no, we will use Zoom, although we have bumped into investors who can't use Zoom, so you have to use Teams or Blue Jeans or some other platform, and it's always hilarious because there's always something different about each platform, right? So the speaker never works, the video doesn't work, and everybody spends 5 minutes trying to figure that out. But I would expect that we're going to use a variety of different media through the process, just because not everyone is on a universal platform.
You know, we usually use Zoom because for some reason the Teams is just very glitchy, and all of a sudden you're gone or you can't connect with somebody. And Zoom seems to be a little bit more stable, but even it has its problems once in a while. Especially difficult is if you try to retract a meeting that's already gone into their Outlook calendar. It's just, they don't know it just turns into chaos. But, you know, welcome to the virtual world.
What about so a lot of times, there's the BioOne platform, I think, that is usually being advertised as helping to connect people from Biotech Showcase and the various conferences. Anybody using that as a tool? Just curious. Okay. All right. In years past, what we did talk about before was, there was a beginning and an end to JP Morgan. And part of that created a tremendous sense of urgency. But with it being spread out longer, do you think we're losing a bit of that sense of urgency?
I actually think there is a bit of that, but I would also say for all the sort of exhaustion and negativity, I won't miss the travel, which Jim said, and I don't disagree, but there is sort of that, it's like you've been to a party and, now it's the day after. And there is kind of a great feeling of getting on that plane, obviously, if you're an East Coaster, at the end of the meeting and saying, wow, we made it through. Now on to the next thing. And there's a sense of catharsis and accomplishment that goes with that. And I know people who plan a trip around what they're going to do at the end. I've gone to visit relatives out west, in the back of JP Morgan on multiple times. And that's a visit that I probably wouldn't allow myself if I were just doing a normal pop-in for a day of one-on-ones to see shareholders in San Fran. So there's just something about it that just says, okay, I've been through this. It's over. Now I can afford a break. I can do something to just sort of do something different. And on Thursday, the 5th, 14th, 12th, whatever it's going to be in January of 2021, the next day is going to be a normal day in my house, with my cup of coffee and my monitor and my Zoom. So.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. I will say that I don't feel like all of the urgency is gone, because if you think about it, from an investor perspective, or even from the perspective of a pharma or biotech or HCIT company, you really need to figure out, okay, what's going to happen this year, right? What am I going to focus on? And I think that's probably more true, certainly from my experiences as a banker working on some of the larger cap names. They really used that time to meet with the entire universe and develop a strategy, right, across their portfolio around how they were going to approach, where they were going to spend time during the year. I think it's hard to dislodge that, right, for a single year. I think people are already looking forward to 2022 and feeling like, okay, we're actually going to get back in person in 2022. So I think there's probably just a lot of not so much tradition, but things that are built on meeting with 500 or 1,000 companies at JP Morgan that has to carry through the year, and you can't afford to extend that over a 6-month period, right? You still want to try to get as much of that in as you possibly can. It may not be in a week, but it's probably within 2 or 3 weeks.
True. So we talked about, you're not going to have that sense of relief when it's behind you. And we talked about there's still some sense of urgency. But I'm also curious because, we've been doing virtual pitching now for a while, but you just learned that you're going to have a little extra time. Is there a temptation to tweak the slides a little bit, add another slide or two? I liked how 25 minutes really helped. I mean, companies had to really focus in on what their messaging was going to be. So have you noticed in the move to virtual that it's changed a bit how you approach the pitching process in the virtual platform? I'll ask that one to Jim.
Well, in the pitches that we make, we've been doing Zoom for 9 months now, so we're pretty good at the technology. But even then, a lot of our meetings are 30 minutes. That's it, and so you don't get the opportunity to go for an hour like you might like to do because they've now got meetings piled on to other people at the same time. So I don't know that that's going to change a lot. People do these sequential meetings every 30 or 40 minutes, and pretty soon they're full as well. So that part's not going to go away, I don't think.
I agree. I do think also the virtual world has increased the frequency of touch points. So you don't have to. I've seen plenty of this play out over the last 6 months where you schedule one call and it is only 30 minutes and it's mostly Q&A. You only cover a third of it, and very soon after, 3 weeks later, they come back because they want to cover, the second third and then the third. Is that there is less this feeling like I've got to cover everything in one big meeting. It's more, I'm going to take this bite size, have some time to think about it because I know I can always schedule another meeting with you. I don't have to wait for your next trip to California or Chicago or, Zurich to have a conversation. We're having more regular dialogue with investors.
Okay, well, that's a really good point. Hunter?
I think that's right. And I think it's extended beyond, obviously, the investor interaction platform. I mean, we're seeing a different approach between MSLs and physicians or, investigators or all kinds of things. There's all kinds of direct access we have to people that would have been in person before. And that facilitates a lot of opportunity, but there's no question that there's things being lost in the process. And I think, again, I'm sure that Terry Ann's involved in this at Beam, and we're all thinking about, okay, how do we operate post-pandemic? How do we operate differently? And one of the things I think everyone realizes is that for senior officers of companies, there's lots of opportunities to operate normally. But for teams and for people who are not at a certain level in their career or trying to develop and network both internally as well as externally, they don't have those opportunities that are provided by walking down the hall. And so, that's as true of walking around the St. Francis or Mason Street as it is inside a company today.
So, I've heard one of the benefits of the virtual platform is like being able to expose a lot more of that leadership team to these, like you said, because it was cost prohibitive to send the big team there. Mm-hmm. Definitely. One other question I did want to ask. So a lot of times because of the gravitas that JPM was, in years past, there were the other conferences. And you talked about the private investor meetings. Was there ever another event that you attended either before, maybe, because I know I got stuck in a couple different cities on my way to JP Morgan several times, and I thought, if I can find a conference that I can attend beforehand that's valuable, I'm going to do it, and I did. So I'm curious if you all have as well. No? Okay. Because
did not know.
Okay.
It was all about JPM.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So
There wasn't bandwidth to do anything else.
It's definitely the alpha dog for sure.
Yeah. Well put, Jim.
well, I was just curious because oftentimes you'd see like one of the CEOs would present at JPM, and then they're also going to be at the Fierce Breakfast or some evening panel or something like that. Did any of you ever do that? Something for you to look forward to, I guess.
Yes.
We did
We
some
have
of
to
that.
preserve what little stamina you have,
That's right.
especially in the petri dish that JP Morgan is.
Yeah. So
I
anyway,
was
go
always
ahead, Jim.
intrigued. There are some big parties, and there are some people who stay at those parties. And I won't be specific, but there are some people who stay at those parties, and there are famous wine tastings that go on. And I am so pooped by the time evening comes. I go to talk to people, and I might have a drink, but I'm not going beyond that. I'm spent. You get behind the eight ball on Monday or Tuesday, you're
done. You're done.
I agree with you. Jim, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, we participated in some of those roundtables and things. But like I said, after it gets very late at night and you're now stuck with all the emails and now you're up the next morning for a cycle of 3 or 4 days, you're pretty well done in by the end of the day. You need to be resuscitated.
Yeah, you and me both. So, well, I think we've talked quite a bit about it. We're getting near the end, and I was just curious. Did we cover everything? Because usually when I get close to the end, I want to have an opportunity to provide everyone, they can offer a parting pearl of wisdom, so to speak. So was there anything that I forgot to ask? Going once? So why don't we do that?
I have one anecdote from the
okay.
meeting. So if you remember the lobby in the Westin, at one time there was a giant grandfather clock there. It was about 10 feet tall. And so weeks before, you lined up meeting people at the clock. And for some reason, one year they removed the clock, and the whole lobby it was like a scrum at a football game or something, because all these people couldn't meet their other people and just milling around. Well, they put the clock back. Maybe you remember that.
I don't remember them taking down the clock, but I know they put the clock back.
But anyway, so good intentions, I guess, just went wrong that year, unintended consequences.
So with that, then, I'm going to ask each participant today to share a parting pearl of wisdom. And let's start with you, Jim. So your parting pearl of wisdom, other than don't meet me at the clock if the clock's not there.
Yeah, well, text messages solve it these days. I've been in management and research for a long, long time. The fundamentals are take care of your people and they'll outperform for you. Nothing magic there. And in biotech, be prepared, listen a lot, don't give up. And finally, the essential thing is be lucky.
All right. How about you, Hunter? How about a parting pearl?
Well, I'd just say is, try to enjoy those types of events like JP Morgan when they're going on. You can always let them be a burden, or you can get energy from them. And I always tried to get energy from them. I always tried to look forward to them. And all that personal interaction certainly is testing, but at the same time, it can give you energy too.
100% agree with you, Hunter, on that. My first few years, I was exhausted at the thought of going out, and so really started to try to take advantage of those moments. I will say it's probably important to just be selective, because that quality of interaction, right? If you try to do everything, you're not going to have any quality interaction. No one's going to remember you. You won't remember anybody. But if you pick 1 or 2 or 3 events where you can really engage with folks and leave with a good sense that this is someone I can call on, I think that's a good takeaway.
I would echo that. I like you go to some of those networking receptions and you'd be like, I feel like I'm at a frat party. I'm out of here. But then you'd go to certain ones where you could really have a good, deep conversation. Those were the ones I enjoyed the most. So I just want to thank everyone for taking their time right before the holidays to share a bit about preparing for JP Morgan in years past versus this year. I hope you've got some value out of this. I want to encourage people to subscribe to Life Science Leader. You can go to www.lifescienceleader.com and go to the subscribe button on the top of the toolbar. I'm Rob Wright. I want to thank you for listening, watching, reading, and most importantly, contributing. Thanks, everyone.